Mia Torres had learned to read lips before she learned to read books. Her brother Danny had been born deaf, and their mother, overwhelmed, alone, struggling, had left when Mia was 7 and Danny was 3. So Mia had taught herself, watched videos, practiced in mirrors, learned to catch words from the shape of mouths across crowded rooms, to understand conversations she couldn't hear, to see what others missed. It was a survival skill, a necessity. And tonight, in the dim golden light of Valentino's Ristorante, it was about to save a stranger's life. The restaurant was busy for a Thursday. White tablecloths, candlelight, the soft clink of expensive wine glasses. Mia moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her feet aching in the cheap black flats she'd worn for the past 14 months, her smile fixed in place, despite the exhaustion that lived in her bones. 3 more hours. 3 more hours and she could go home, check on Danny, collapse into bed for 4 hours before her morning shift at the diner across town. 2 jobs, 70 hours a week. And still, the hospital bills kept coming. Transplant waitlist, 6 months minimum. Copay due upon admission. She shoved the thought aside and approached the large table in the back corner. She'd noticed them the moment they walked in. 6 men in suits that cost more than her annual salary, moving with the quiet confidence of people who owned the world and knew it. The other servers had drawn straws to see who would take the table. Mia had lost. Or won, depending on how you looked at it. Men like this tipped well, and Mia needed every dollar she could get. "Good evening, gentlemen." She kept her voice steady, her posture straight. "Welcome to Valentino's. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Most of them barely glanced at her, but the man at the head of the table, he looked. He was younger than she'd expected. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair pushed back from a face that was almost too beautiful, all sharp angles and shadows. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, and when they met hers, something flickered in their depths. Interest, maybe, or assessment. The look of a man who cataloged everything and forgot nothing. "Bring a bottle of the Barolo," he said. His voice was low, smooth, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "The 2015. "Of course." She wrote it down, though she didn't need to. "Any appetizers while you wait?" "The calamari. And the burrata." He turned back to his companions, dismissing her as completely as if she'd ceased to exist. Mia retreated to the kitchen, placed the order, and collected the wine. When she returned to pour, the men were deep in conversation. Low voices, guarded expressions, the kind of talk that happened in back rooms and dark alleys. She kept her eyes down and her hands steady. But her attention was elsewhere. The table by the window. 4 men, nursing drinks they'd barely touched, their gazes returning again and again to the party in the corner. They'd been there when she arrived for her shift 3 hours ago. They'd ordered almost nothing. And they kept watching. Mia had learned, in 23 years of hardship, to trust her instincts. Her instincts were screaming. She cleared a nearby table, moving slowly, positioning herself at an angle where she could see the men by the window without being obvious. One of them was talking. A heavy-set man with a scar across his chin, his lips moving in quick, clipped sentences. Mia watched. And read. "When he goes to take a piss. Enzo gives the signal. We move." Her blood turned to ice. 3 of us through the kitchen. Quiet, clean. Enzo keeps the others at the table until it's done. Enzo. Mia's eyes darted to the corner table. 6 men. She scanned their faces, trying to remember the names she'd overheard during their conversation. Marco, Sal, Dominic, and the one sitting closest to the boss, the one with the nervous hands and the smile that never reached his eyes. Enzo. The man at the window was still talking. "Carbone's got no idea. Enzo's been feeding us information for months. Tonight we take the throne. Carbone. She'd heard that name before, whispered in the streets, printed in headlines that danced around the truth. Luca Carbone, the head of one of the most powerful crime families on the eastern seaboard. And he was sitting in her section, 20 feet away, with a traitor at his elbow and killers waiting for him to stand up. Mia's hands were shaking. She gripped her serving tray tighter, willing herself to think. She couldn't go to the police. By the time they arrived, he'd be dead. She couldn't warn him out loud. The men by the window would hear, and she'd be dead too. Danny would be alone. The transplant would never happen. But she couldn't just do nothing. The check. She could write on the check. She retreated to the server's station, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her pen and the leather billfold that held the table's receipt. What could she write? How could she make him understand without alerting anyone else? One word. She had to keep it simple. One word that would tell him everything he needed to know. She wrote it at the bottom of the receipt, then circled it 3 times with dark, deliberate strokes. Enzo. She walked back to the table on legs that felt like water. The men were laughing at something, some joke she hadn't heard. Luca Carbone was leaning back in his chair, a glass of wine in his hand, looking for all the world like a man without an enemy in sight. Your check, sir. She placed the billfold in front of him. Whenever you're ready. He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. She held his gaze for just a moment, long enough to let him see the fear she couldn't hide, then flicked her eyes toward the window table. Just once. Just for a heartbeat. Then she turned and walked away. She was 3 steps from the kitchen door when she heard the chair scrape back. Mia turned. Luca Carbone was on his feet, the receipt clutched in his hand, his whiskey eyes locked on her with an intensity that stole her breath. The laughter had died. Every man at the table had gone still, confused, alarmed. Except Enzo. Enzo had gone pale. Carbone said something low and sharp in Italian, too fast for her to catch. And suddenly the table erupted into motion. 2 of his men grabbed Enzo before he could run. 2 more moved toward the window, hands reaching inside their jackets. And Luca Carbone walked toward Mia. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, dark, expensive, dangerous, and feel the heat radiating off his body. How did you know? His voice was soft, controlled, but underneath it she heard the edge of something lethal. I read lips. The words came out barely above a whisper. The men by the window. I saw what they were saying. His eyes narrowed. For a long moment he simply stared at her, as if he could see through her skin to the fear and desperation underneath. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. What's your name? Mia. Mia Torres. You just saved my life. Mia Torres. He pressed the card into her palm. His fingers were warm against her frozen skin. That's not something I forget. Behind him, chaos was unfolding. Shouts, the crash of tables overturning, the men by the window scrambling for the exit. But Carbone didn't turn, didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on her. When you're ready to collect on that debt, he said, call the number on the card. Then he was gone, sweeping out through the kitchen with his men and his traitor, leaving Mia standing alone in the middle of the restaurant with a card in her hand and her whole world tilting beneath her feet. She looked down at the card. Heavy cream stock, a single phone number embossed in black. No name, no explanation, just a promise. And Mia Torres, who had spent her whole life asking for nothing, suddenly had a debt to call in. 2 weeks later, Mia's brother collapsed in the grocery store. She got the call during her morning shift at the diner, Danny's school. Frantic, telling her he'd been found unconscious in the cereal aisle of the corner market where he sometimes stopped on his walk home. By the time she reached the hospital, he was awake, but pale, hooked up to machines that beeped out the rhythm of his failing kidneys. His levels are critical. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. We've moved him up on the transplant list, but without a donor match, we're looking at dialysis 3 times a week. Possibly for years. I can give him mine. Mia had said it before. She would say it 1,000 times. Test me again, please. Miss Torres, we've tested you twice. You're not a match. The doctor touched her arm. I'm sorry. All we can do now is wait. Wait. With bills piling up like autumn leaves. With Danny getting weaker every day. With hope slipping through her fingers like water. That night, Mia sat in the hospital parking lot and stared at the card she'd been carrying in her wallet for 14 days. That's not something I forget. She dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. It rang once, twice, then a voice. Not his, someone else, clipped and professional. Name? Mia Torres. A pause. Hold. 30 seconds of silence, then a different voice. Low, smooth. The faint hint of an accent. Miss Torres. Luca Carbone sounded almost pleased. I was beginning to think you'd lost my card. I need... Her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. You said I could collect on a debt. I did. My brother is sick. He needs a kidney transplant, and I can't... The bills are... She pressed her hand over her eyes, willing herself not to cry. I don't have anyone else to ask. Silence stretched across the line. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer somehow. More careful. Where are you? St. Francis Hospital, the parking lot. Stay there. I'm sending a car. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up beside her rusted Toyota. The driver, a large man with a shaved head and eyes that had seen everything, opened the rear door without a word. Mia got in. The car took her to a brownstone in a part of the city she'd never been able to afford. The kind of neighborhood where the trees were old and the houses whispered of money so deep it had seeped into the foundations. She was led through a side entrance, down a hallway lined with art she couldn't name, and into a study that smelled of leather and old books. Luca Carbone sat behind a massive oak desk, his jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked different here, in his own space, less like a predator and more like a king. Still dangerous, but somehow more human. Sit. She sat. He studied her for a long moment, those whiskey eyes moving over her face with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Then he opened a folder on his desk and slid it toward her. Daniel Torres, age 17, born deaf, diagnosed with chronic kidney disease at 12, currently in stage 4 renal failure. He glanced up. Your brother. Mia's throat tightened. You investigated me? I investigate everyone. He leaned back in his chair. You work 2 jobs. You have no savings. You've been paying off your mother's debts for 6 years, even though she abandoned you when you were a child. His voice held no judgment, just facts, laid out like cards on a table. You're 23 years old, and you've been carrying the weight of a family since you were 7. I don't need your pity. Good. I'm not offering any. He closed the folder. I'm offering you a job. Mia blinked. What? Your brother's medical expenses will be covered. All of them. The transplant, the aftercare, the medication, whatever he needs. He paused. In exchange, you come work for me. Doing what? I have a sister. Something flickered in his expression, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. Kiara. She's 16. She's been deaf since birth. Mia's breath caught. Since our parents died, He stopped. His jaw tightened, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. She saw something beneath the cold exterior, something raw, something wounded. She doesn't speak. Not with her voice, not with her hands. She shut herself off from everyone. The specialists say there's nothing physically wrong. It's psychological. Trauma. And you think I can help her? I think you're the first person I've met in 5 years who understands what it means to love someone who lives in silence. His eyes held hers. You learned to lip read for your brother. You taught yourself sign language. You built a bridge to him when the rest of the world would have let him drown. He stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of her. This close, she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Build a bridge to my sister Mia Torres. Help her find her way back. His voice dropped, rough with something that sounded almost like desperation. And I'll give your brother a future. Mia thought of Danny in that hospital bed. The machines, the failing kidneys, the years of dialysis stretching out before him like a prison sentence. She thought of this man, this dangerous, powerful, impossible man, asking her for help. Not demanding. Asking. If I say yes, she said slowly, I want it in writing. Every medical expense, every treatment, guaranteed. Done. And I want to keep seeing Danny. Every day if I can. He'll be moved to a private facility, best doctors in the city. You can visit whenever you want. She searched his face for the lie, the catch, the trap. She found nothing but patience and something that looked almost like hope. Why me? She whispered. You could hire anyone, specialists, experts. Why a waitress who reads lips? Luca Carbone looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched her chin, tilting her face up toward his. Because you saw a stranger about to die, and you risked everything to save him. His thumb brushed across her jaw, feather light. That's not something you can teach. That's not something money can buy. He released her and stepped back. That's who you are. Mia's heart was pounding. Her skin burned where he'd touched her. When do I start? Tomorrow. He handed her another card, this one with an address. My driver will pick you up at 8. Pack a bag. You'll be staying here. She looked at the card, then at him, then at the future stretching out before her, terrifying and unknown and glittering with possibility. Okay, she said. Okay. And just like that, Mia Torres stepped through the door into a world she'd never imagined and a life she could never have predicted. Chiara Carbone was a ghost haunting her brother's mansion. Mia saw her for the first time on her second morning in the brownstone, a slip of a girl with dark hair and darker eyes, drifting down the hallway in an oversized sweater, her gaze fixed on nothing. She moved like smoke, there and gone before Mia could even raise her hand in greeting. She won't talk to you. Luca's voice came from behind her, quiet and heavy with resignation. She doesn't talk to anyone. She talked to someone once. Mia turned to face him. Before your parents died. She had a voice then, didn't she? Even if it wasn't spoken out loud. Something shifted in his expression. Pain, maybe. Or memory. She was the loudest person in any room. His voice was rough. Her hands never stopped moving. She had opinions about everything. Music, food, politics. She used to argue with our father about philosophy at the dinner table. She was alive. What happened? She was there. He looked away, his jaw tight. When they were killed. She saw everything. And afterward, he spread his hands, a gesture of helplessness that looked foreign on a man built for control. She just stopped. Mia thought of Danny, the way he'd retreated into himself after their mother left, how it had taken months of patience and persistence to coax him back out. The silence of a wounded soul was a language she understood. I need time with her, she said. Alone. No guards. No staff hovering. Just me. She won't respond. Maybe not at first. Mia met his eyes. But I'm patient, and I don't give up on people. Luca studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Whatever you need. The first week was the hardest. Mia didn't push, didn't demand. She simply existed in Kiara's space. She sat in the library while Kiara read, never speaking, never signing, just present. She ate breakfast at the same table, leaving space between them, letting the silence stretch without trying to fill it. She walked in the garden when Kiara walked, always a few steps behind, never intruding. And slowly, so slowly, the ghost began to notice her. It started with glances, quick, furtive looks that darted away the moment Mia met them. Then lingering gazes, curious despite themselves. Then, on the 8th day, Kiara stopped in the middle of the garden path and turned to face her. She didn't sign, didn't speak, but she raised one eyebrow in a question that was unmistakable. Why are you here? Mia lifted her hands and signed her answer. Because your brother asked me to be. Because I have a brother too. And I know what it's like to love someone who lives in silence. Because I think you have things to say, and I want to hear them. Kiara's eyes widened. For a moment, just a moment, the walls flickered. Then she turned and walked away, faster than before. But the next morning she sat one chair closer at breakfast. Progress. Over the following weeks, Mia learned the rhythms of the Carbone household. She learned that Luca left early and returned late, that his business consumed him like a fire that never stopped burning. She learned the names of his lieutenants: Marco, the quiet one with the kind eyes; Sal, who told terrible jokes and laughed at them himself; Gio, who watched everyone and trusted no one. She learned that the brownstone was a fortress disguised as a home, security cameras hidden in the crown molding, armed men stationed at every entrance, a panic room behind the library wall. She learned that the meals were prepared by a private chef, that the cars were bulletproof, that the life she'd stumbled into was built on a foundation of money and blood and secrets. And she learned, slowly and against her better judgment, that Luca Carbone was not the monster the newspapers painted him to be. She saw him with his sister, the way his hard edges softened when Chiara entered a room, the way he watched her with a desperate hope he thought he hid. She saw him with his men, firm but fair, demanding loyalty but earning it. She saw him late at night, alone in his study, staring at a photograph of a family she would never meet. You're working too hard. He looked up, startled. Mia stood in the doorway of his study, a cup of tea in her hands. It was after midnight. She'd heard him pacing from her room down the hall and had followed the sound without thinking. I didn't realize I had a curfew. You don't. She crossed the room and set the tea on his desk. But you haven't slept in 3 days, and even Mafia bosses need rest. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Is that your professional medical opinion? It's my professional human opinion. She perched on the edge of the chair across from him. What's keeping you awake? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. The man who betrayed me. Enzo. He spat the name like poison. He wasn't working alone. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone with enough power to plant a traitor in my inner circle. Do you know who? I have suspicions. His jaw tightened. A man named Victor Rinaldi. He's been circling my territory for years, looking for weaknesses. Enzo was supposed to be his way in. But you stopped it. You stopped it. His eyes found hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. You saw what no one else saw. You saved my life with a word circled on a receipt. Heat crept up her neck. Anyone would have... No. He leaned forward. Not anyone, you. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How long it's been since someone surprised me? The air between them felt charged, electric. Mia's heart hammered against her ribs. Luca, Mr. Carbone? A sharp knock at the door. Gio stepped inside, his face taut with urgency. We have a situation. The warmth vanished from Luca's expression, replaced by cold command. What is it? Rinaldi's men. They hit one of our shipments on the docks. Gio's eyes flicked to Mia, then back. And they left a message. He handed Luca a photograph. Mia watched the color drain from his face. What is it? She stood, fear coiling in her stomach. Luca. What? He turned the photograph toward her. It was Danny, her brother, sitting in his hospital bed, reading a book, completely unaware that someone had been close enough to photograph him through the window. And scrawled across the bottom in red marker, the deaf boy first, then the deaf girl, then everyone you love. Mia's knees buckled. Luca caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and steady around her. Breathe. His voice was low, urgent. Mia, look at me. Breathe. Danny! The word came out broken. They have Danny? They don't have him. Not yet. His hands gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. I'm going to send men to the hospital right now. Armed guards, round the clock. No one gets near him. And Chiara? She's safe here. The house is a fortress. His jaw set like iron. Rinaldi thinks he can use the people I love against me. He's wrong. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to end this. Tonight. He released her and turned toward the door. Luca, wait. Mia grabbed his arm. Let me come with you. Absolutely not. I can help. I can read lips. You can stay here and stay safe. His voice softened, just slightly. I didn't save your brother just to get you killed. He pulled away, barking orders to Gio as he strode down the hallway. Mia watched him go, her heart torn between terror and something else. Something fierce and protective that had no business existing. She was still standing there, frozen, when a hand touched her elbow. Chiara stood beside her, pale and trembling. And for the first time since Mia had arrived, she signed. I know where Rinaldi is. Mia stared at her. I know things my brother doesn't. Things I overheard before everything. Her hands shook, but she kept signing. I can help. But you have to take me with you. Mia looked at the girl. This broken, silent girl who was finally reaching out, and made a decision that would change everything. Show me. The warehouse district on the south side of the city was a graveyard of industry, abandoned factories, rusted shipping containers, the skeletal remains of a manufacturing boom that had died decades ago. Mia drove through the empty streets with white knuckles on the steering wheel, Chiara beside her in the passenger seat, signing directions with hands that had finally found their purpose. Left here, then straight for 2 blocks. The building with the broken windows. They shouldn't be doing this. Mia knew that. She should have told someone, should have waited for Luca, should have done anything other than steal a car from the garage and drive into the heart of enemy territory with a traumatized 16-year-old girl. But Danny's face in that photograph kept flashing through her mind, and Chiara, silent, shuttered Chiara, had finally spoken, had finally reached out. Mia couldn't ignore that, couldn't turn away from the first real connection the girl had made in years. There, Chiara pointed to a building at the end of the block, 3 stories of crumbling brick, every window dark except for a faint glow on the top floor. Rinaldi uses it for meetings, private ones, the kind my father used to have before. Her hands faltered. Mia reached over and squeezed her arm. You're doing great, she said softly. You're so brave, Chiara. Your brother is going to be so proud of you. Something glistened in the girl's dark eyes. She nodded once, sharply, and opened the car door. They moved through the shadows, keeping close to the walls, avoiding the pools of light cast by the few working street lamps. Mia's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She'd never done anything like this, never crept through darkness toward danger, never willingly walked into a place where people wanted her dead. But she thought of Danny. She thought of Luca. She thought of the girl beside her, finally emerging from her shell. Some things were worth the risk. The side entrance was unlocked, careless, or maybe a trap. Mia pushed through it slowly, wincing at the creak of old hinges. The interior was dark, dusty, filled with the ghosts of machinery long since removed. A staircase led upward, toward that faint glow. "I'll wait here," Kiara signed. "If something goes wrong, I'll run. Get help." "No." Mia grabbed her hand. "We stay together. No matter what." They climbed. The third floor opened into a wide space that might once have been a factory floor. Now it held a table, a few chairs, and half a dozen men in dark suits. At the head of the table sat a man Mia had never seen but recognized immediately. Silver hair, cold eyes, a smile that held no warmth at all. Victor Rinaldi. She and Chiara ducked behind a support column, barely breathing. Mia peered around the edge and watched Rinaldi's lips move. "Carbone's on his way to the docks, chasing ghosts. By the time he realizes his mistake, we'll have the girl and the brother both." Another man spoke, younger, nervous. "What about the waitress, the one who reads lips?" Rinaldi laughed. "A parlor trick. She's nothing. Collateral damage." Mia's jaw tightened. Collateral damage. That's all she was to him. All Danny was. All Chiara was. Pieces on a board to be sacrificed. Not tonight. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Of course. They were probably jamming it. She looked at Chiara, mind racing. "Is there another way out of here?" she breathed. Chiara nodded and signed. "Fire escape. Back of the building. But we'd have to cross their line of sight. Then we wait. We watch. And the moment they move, we run." But fate had other plans. One of Rinaldi's men stood and stretched, and froze. His eyes locked on the column where they were hiding, on the shadow that didn't quite fit. "Boss." His voice carried across the empty space. "We've got company." Everything happened at once. Mia shoved Chiara toward the fire escape. "Run! Go!" Chiara bolted. Mia turned to follow. A hand closed around her throat. She was lifted off her feet, slammed against the column hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. The man who held her was enormous, his grip like iron, his face empty of anything resembling mercy. "Well, well," Rinaldi's voice drifted over, almost amused. "The lip-reading waitress. You know, when Enzo told me about you, I didn't believe him. A girl who can hear with her eyes. Remarkable." Mia clawed at the hand around her throat. Spots danced in her vision. "Let me go." "I don't think so." Rinaldi appeared in front of her, his cold eyes studying her face. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Miss Torres. Ruined months of careful planning with one circled word." He reached out and touched her cheek, almost gentle. "I think I'll let Carbone find you here. In pieces. A message he won't soon forget. He'll kill you." The words came out strangled, barely audible. "He'll burn your whole world down." "Perhaps." Rinaldi smiled. "But he'll have to find me first." A gunshot shattered the silence. The man holding Mia dropped, a red bloom spreading across his chest. She hit the ground hard, gasping, and looked up to see Chiara, standing at the top of the fire escape stairs, a gun in her trembling hands, her face pale but set with determination. Behind her, the sound of footsteps, many of them, coming fast. My brother taught me to shoot, Kiara said. Her voice, her actual voice, rough and cracked from years of disuse, but hers. When I was 12, before everything. Rinaldi's men drew their weapons. Kiara fired again, wild, untrained, but enough to make them scatter for cover. And then, the cavalry arrived. Luca Carbone burst through the stairwell door like a force of nature, his men pouring in behind him. His eyes swept the room, found Rinaldi's men, found Mia on the floor, found his sister with a gun in her hands and words on her lips for the first time in years. Something broke open in his face, something raw and desperate and ferocious. "Get down!" he roared. Mia flattened herself against the concrete. Gunfire erupted around her, deafening, terrifying, the thunder of a war she'd never asked to be part of. She crawled toward Kiara, grabbed her arm, pulled her behind an overturned table. "Stay down." She wrapped her arms around the girl. "I've got you. I've got you." The battle was brutal, but brief. Luca's men were trained, disciplined, lethal. One by one, Rinaldi's guards fell. And when the smoke cleared, only one man was left standing. Victor Rinaldi, on his knees, a gun pressed to the back of his head. Luca walked toward him slowly. His suit was torn, his knuckles bloody, his face a mask of cold fury. He stopped in front of the man who had threatened everything he loved and stared down at him with eyes that promised death. "You came after my family." His voice was quiet, controlled, more terrifying than any shout. "My sister, the woman who saved my life, a 17-year-old boy in a hospital bed." "Carbone," Rinaldi's voice cracked, "we can make a deal." "There are no deals." Luca crouched down, his face inches from Rinaldi's. "There is only this. You will tell me every name, every contact, every safe house, and then you will disappear from this city. And if I ever see your face again, if I ever hear your name again, I will erase you from existence." He stood and turned away. "Marco, get him out of my sight." Mia watched them drag Rinaldi away. Then Luca was in front of her, pulling her to her feet, his hands running over her arms, her face, her shoulders, checking for injuries, his touch frantic despite his careful expression. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you? I swear to God, Mia, if he—" "I'm okay." She caught his hands in hers. "Luca, I'm okay." He pulled her against his chest, crushing her to him so tightly she could barely breathe. His heart hammered against her ear. His whole body shook. "When Gio told me you were gone," his voice broke. "When I realized where you'd gone, I had to." She pulled back to look at him. Kiara knew where Rinaldi was. She spoke, Luca. She used her voice. His eyes moved to his sister, who stood a few feet away, the gun now lowered, tears streaming down her face. He released Mia and crossed to Kiara in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Kiara." His voice was raw, broken. "Sorelina, I'm sorry." She signed against his back, her movements clumsy, unpracticed, rusty. "I'm sorry I stopped talking. I'm sorry I left you alone. You're here now." He held her tighter. "That's all that matters. You're here." Mia watched them, brother and sister, finally reunited in a way that transcended words, and felt tears spill down her own cheeks. She thought of Danny, safe now, guarded by Luca's men. She thought of the life she'd stumbled into, so different from anything she'd imagined. She thought of the man who had walked through fire to find her. When Luca finally released his sister, he turned back to Mia. His eyes were bright, vulnerable, open in a way she'd never seen. "You saved her," he said quietly. "You brought her back." "She saved herself." Mia smiled through her tears. "I just gave her a reason." He crossed to her, took her face in his hands and kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and fierce, and full of everything he'd been holding back. The fear, the longing, the love that had been building since the moment she'd circled a word on a receipt and changed his life forever. Mia kissed him back with equal ferocity, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his, her heart finally finding its home. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he breathed. "Stay. Not because of the deal. Not because of your brother. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Mia smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." 1 year later, Mia stood in the private garden behind the brownstone and watched her brother dance with Kiara under strings of golden lights. The party had been Luca's idea, a celebration of Danny's recovery, of Kiara's return to the world, of a family stitched together from broken pieces and unlikely threads. 50 guests filled the garden, laughing and talking and toasting to futures none of them had dared to imagine. Danny looked healthy, strong. The transplant had been a success. A donor found through Luca's network, the surgery performed by the best specialists in the country. He still needed checkups, still needed medication, but the shadow that had hung over him for years had finally lifted. He was 18 now, enrolled in college, studying graphic design, dreaming of a life that extended beyond hospital walls. And Kiara was transformed. She still signed more than she spoke, her voice saved for moments of particular importance. But she laughed now, she argued. She had opinions about everything, just as Luca said she used to. She'd taken to Danny immediately, the two of them bonding over shared experiences, over the silent language they both understood, over being the younger siblings of people who loved them fiercely and protectively. Mia watched them spin across the dance floor, Danny leading despite having learned the steps only yesterday, Kiara throwing her head back in laughter when he stumbled. "They look happy." Luca's voice came from beside her, warm and low. She felt his arm slide around her waist, pulling her close. "They are happy." She leaned into him. "We all are." It still surprised her sometimes, how natural this felt. Living in the brownstone, sharing Luca's bed, his life, his world. She'd kept her job at the hospital, working part-time now in the trauma unit, because helping people was part of who she was, and Luca understood that. But she'd also become something else. A partner, a confidant, the woman who knew his secrets and loved him anyway. The world he lived in was still dangerous. She understood that. There were still enemies, still rivals, still dark corners where violence lurked. But Rinaldi was gone, exiled to another continent, his network dismantled, his name erased from the city's power structure. And Luca had changed too. He was still ruthless when he needed to be, still commanded his empire with an iron will. But the ice in his eyes had thawed. The walls around his heart had crumbled. She had done that. She and Danny and Kiara together. "Dance with me." Mia blinked. "What?" Luca was already pulling her toward the dance floor, ignoring her protests, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You heard me. Dance with me. I'm a terrible dancer. I know, I've seen you try." He spun her into his arms, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "But I don't care." The music was slow, something Italian and old, a song his mother used to love. Mia let him lead, let herself sink into the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his heart against her cheek. "I have something for you," he murmured against her hair. "Luca, you've already given me everything." "Not everything." He stopped moving and reached into his jacket pocket. When his hand emerged, it held a small velvet box. Mia's heart stopped. "1 year ago, you circled a word on a receipt and saved my life. His voice was rough, thick with emotion. You walked into my world, this dangerous, broken, impossible world, and you made it better. You brought my sister back. You gave your brother a future. You gave me a future. He opened the box. Inside, a diamond ring caught the light. Simple, elegant, breathtaking. I've spent my whole life taking what I wanted, he continued, building power, destroying enemies. I thought that was strength. I thought that was enough. He shook his head slowly. It wasn't. Not until you. You taught me that real strength is letting someone in, trusting them, loving them even when it terrifies you. He sank to one knee. The garden had gone silent. Every guest had turned to watch. Danny and Kiara stood frozen on the dance floor, their faces bright with joy. Mia Torres, Luca said, his whiskey eyes shining. You saw me when no one else did. You stayed when anyone else would have run. You made me believe I could be more than what I was. His voice cracked on the last word. Will you marry me? Mia couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down her face and her hands trembled as she reached for him. Yes, she whispered. Then stronger. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and rose to his feet in one fluid motion, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like champagne and tears and forever. The garden erupted in cheers, Danny whooping, Kiara clapping, the guests raising their glasses to toast the future. When they finally broke apart, Luca pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said softly, more than I ever thought possible. I love you too. Mia smiled through her tears. Even though you're a terrible dancer. He laughed, a real laugh, full and warm and free, and pulled her close again. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, exhausted, desperate, reading lips in a restaurant just to survive. She thought about the word she'd circled on that receipt, the single act of courage that had changed everything. She had walked into a world of danger looking for salvation. She had found something better. She had found love. And as the music swelled and the lights glittered and her family, her beautiful, improbable, perfect family, surrounded her, Mia Torres knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.